The world of solo leveling was one where humanity teetered on the brink of extinction, a fragile existence constantly under siege by monstrous creatures that emerged from mysterious gates connecting to other dimensions. These gates, unpredictable and deadly, spawned dungeons filled with horrors that only hunters, humans blessed with supernatural abilities, could combat. Among these hunters, Sung Jinwoo stood apart, not for his strength, but for his determination. Once the weakest E-rank hunter, Jinwoo had clawed his way up from the bottom, defying death and destiny alike to become the Shadow Monarch, a being of unparalleled power. Yet, even the strongest could be betrayed. The story began in the aftermath of Jinwoo's rise to power. The world had stabilized, or so it seemed. The gates were fewer, the monsters less frequent, and humanity had begun to rebuild. Jinwoo, now a figure of legend, had taken on the mantle of protector, his shadow soldiers standing as an indomitable force against any threat. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. The Phantom Monarch, a being of equal power and ambition, had long watched Jinwoo's rise with envy and suspicion. Once an ally, the Phantom Monarch had grown resentful of Jinwoo's dominance, his shadow army, and the loyalty they commanded. The seeds of betrayal had been sown, and the first act of treachery was about to unfold. Jinwoo's day began like any other. He stood atop a skyscraper in Seoul, the city sprawled beneath him like a living map. The air was crisp, the sky a pale blue, and the hum of life below was a reminder of what he fought to protect. His shadow soldiers, ever loyal, stood at attention behind him, their forms shifting and writhing like living darkness. Among them was Igris, his most trusted knight, and Beru, the insectoid general whose ferocity was matched only by his loyalty. Jinwoo's sharp eyes scanned the horizon, his senses attuned to the faintest ripple of mana. He had grown accustomed to peace, but his instincts, honed through countless battles, never wavered. The first sign of trouble came as a faint distortion in the air, a ripple that most would have dismissed as a trick of the light. But Jinwoo noticed. His hand twitched, and a dagger of shadow materialized in his grip. The ripple grew, spreading like a crack in glass, until a gate began to form. This was no ordinary gate. Its edges shimmered with an otherworldly light, and the mana it emitted was unlike anything Jinwoo had encountered before. He frowned, his mind racing. Gates were supposed to be predictable, their levels and dangers quantifiable. This one defied all logic. Before he could react, a figure emerged from the gate. It was the Phantom Monarch, his form cloaked in a swirling mist of silver and black. His eyes glowed with a cold, calculating light, and his presence was suffocating, as if the very air around him bent to his will. Jinwoo tensed, his shadow soldiers shifting into defensive positions. "Phantom Monarch," Jinwoo said, his voice calm but laced with warning. "What brings you here?" The Phantom Monarch smirked, his voice a low, resonant hum. "Jinwoo, my old friend. Or should I say, my rival? I've come to offer you a choice. Join me, and together we can reshape this world. Or resist, and face the consequences." Jinwoo's eyes narrowed. He had never trusted the Phantom Monarch, but this was beyond anything he had anticipated. "I protect this world, not reshape it," he replied. "If you've come to threaten me, you'll find I'm not so easily intimidated." The Phantom Monarch's smirk widened. "Oh, Jinwoo. You always were so stubborn. Very well. Let's see if your shadows can withstand my phantoms." With a wave of his hand, the Phantom Monarch summoned an army of spectral warriors, their forms flickering like ghosts. They surged forward, their weapons gleaming with an eerie light. Jinwoo didn't hesitate. He raised his hand, and his shadow soldiers sprang into action. Igris led the charge, his massive sword cleaving through the spectral ranks with brutal efficiency. Beru darted through the chaos, his movements a blur as he tore through enemies with razor-sharp claws. Jinwoo himself moved like a shadow, his dagger flashing as he countered every attack with precision. The battle was a symphony of destruction. Jinwoo's shadows clashed with the phantoms, their attacks creating shockwaves that shattered windows and sent debris flying. Jinwoo's dagger transformed into a sword of pure darkness, its edge slicing through the air with a low hum. He parried a strike from a phantom knight, then countered with a spinning slash that sent the enemy dissipating into mist. The Phantom Monarch watched from a distance, his expression unreadable. As the fight raged on, Jinwoo began to notice something unsettling. The phantoms weren't just mindless soldiers. They fought with a strange intelligence, their movements coordinated and deliberate. And then there was the Phantom Monarch himself. He hadn't moved, hadn't even raised a hand to join the battle. It was as if he was testing Jinwoo, probing his limits. The realization sent a chill down Jinwoo's spine. This wasn't just a fight, it was a message. With a roar, Jinwoo unleashed his full power. Shadows erupted from the ground, forming a massive dragon that roared and thrashed, its claws tearing through the Phantom army. The Phantom Monarch's smirk faltered for the first time, but only for a moment. "Impressive," he said, his voice dripping with mock admiration. "But this is only the beginning." Before Jinwoo could respond, the Phantom Monarch raised his hand, and the gate behind him began to expand. A wave of energy pulsed outward, forcing Jinwoo and his shadows back. The Phantom Monarch stepped into the gate, his form dissolving into mist. "Until we meet again, Jinwoo," his voice echoed. "Next time, I won't hold back." The gate collapsed, leaving Jinwoo standing amidst the ruins of the battle. His shadow soldiers regrouped, their forms flickering as they absorbed the remnants of the phantoms. Jinwoo's mind raced. The Phantom Monarch's betrayal was clear, but his motives were shrouded in mystery. And then there was the gate. It hadn't been like any other. Its mana, its structure, it hinted at something far greater, a threat that even Jinwoo might not be able to handle alone. As he looked out over the city, Jinwoo felt a weight settle on his shoulders. The peace he had fought so hard to achieve was fragile, and now it was under threat from an enemy he had once called an ally. But Jinwoo was no stranger to adversity. He had faced death and emerged stronger. Whatever the Phantom Monarch was planning, Jinwoo would be ready. The shadows stirred at his feet, a reminder of the power he wielded. The battle had only just begun. Jinwoo's heart pounded in his chest as the Phantom Monarch's laughter echoed through the cavernous throne room, its eerie resonance bouncing off the jagged walls. The betrayal had been swift and brutal, the Monarch's once promising alliance now shattered into shards of mistrust. Jinwoo's shadow soldiers stood at the ready, their forms flickering like dark flames, but even they seemed unnerved by the Monarch's overwhelming aura. The air was thick with tension, the kind that made every breath feel like a struggle. Jinwoo clenched his fists, his mind racing. He had faced countless enemies before, but this was different. The Phantom Monarch wasn't just powerful, he was cunning, manipulative, and now, openly hostile. Before Jinwoo could formulate a plan, the ground beneath him trembled violently. Cracks spider-webbed across the stone floor, and from the fissures emerged shadowy tendrils, writhing like serpents. The Monarch's voice boomed, dripping with malice. "You thought you could outwit me, Jinwoo? How naive. But this is only the beginning." The tendrils lunged, forcing Jinwoo to leap back, his instincts kicking in. He summoned his dagger, ruler's authority, and slashed through the shadows, but they reformed almost instantly. His shadow soldiers surged forward, engaging the tendrils in a chaotic dance of blades and darkness. The room became a battlefield, the clash of steel and the hiss of shadows filling the air. As Jinwoo fought, a new realization dawned on him. The Monarch wasn't just attacking him, he was stalling. The tremors grew stronger, and from the depths of the cavern, a low, guttural roar emerged. Jinwoo's eyes widened as a massive, serpentine creature burst through the floor, its scales glistening like polished obsidian. Its eyes burned with an otherworldly light, and its fangs dripped with venom that sizzled against the stone. The Monarch's laughter grew louder. "Meet my pet, the Abyssal Serpent. Let's see how long you last against it." The stakes had just escalated. Not only was Jinwoo facing the Phantom Monarch, but now he had to contend with a creature of immense power. His mind raced as he assessed the situation. The Abyssal Serpent was too large to take down with brute force alone, and the Monarch's presence meant he couldn't focus solely on the beast. He needed a strategy, and fast. Jinwoo's shadow soldiers were holding their own against the tendrils, but they were being pushed back. He needed to buy time. Jinwoo's eyes darted to the cavern walls, where jagged stalactites hung precariously. An idea sparked. He shouted to his soldiers, "Focus on the tendrils. Keep them occupied." As they obeyed, Jinwoo darted toward the wall, his agility allowing him to scale the rough surface with ease. The Abyssal Serpent lunged at him, its massive jaws snapping shut just inches from his legs. Jinwoo gritted his teeth and leapt onto a stalactite, using his momentum to swing himself higher. The serpent followed, its massive body coiling around the stone pillars as it pursued him. From his vantage point, Jinwoo could see the cavern's layout more clearly. The Monarch stood on a raised platform, watching the chaos unfold with a smug grin. Jinwoo's eyes narrowed. If he could lure the serpent toward the Monarch, he might be able to force the Monarch to defend himself, creating an opening. But first, he needed to deal with the serpent. Jinwoo focused his energy, summoning his shadow exchange ability. In an instant, he swapped places with one of his shadow soldiers, appearing on the cavern floor just as the serpent crashed into the stalactite he had been standing on. The impact sent shards of rock raining down, and Jinwoo used the distraction to strike. He dashed forward, ruler's authority glowing with dark energy, and plunged the dagger into the serpent's side. The creature roared in pain, thrashing wildly, but Jinwoo held on, driving the blade deeper. The monarch's grin faltered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. Impressive, he sneered. But you're only delaying the inevitable. He raised his hand, and the shadows around him coalesced into a massive spear. With a flick of his wrist, he launched it toward Jinwoo. Jinwoo barely had time to react, using his dagger to deflect the spear, but the force of the impact sent him skidding back. The abyssal serpent, now enraged, turned its attention back to him, its eyes blazing with fury. As Jinwoo struggled to regain his footing, a voice echoed in his mind. It was Igris, his loyal Shadow Knight. My liege, we cannot defeat them alone. We must retreat and regroup. Jinwoo hesitated. Retreating went against every instinct he had, but Igris was right. He was outmatched, and staying would only lead to his downfall. He needed to find allies, or at least a way to level the playing field. With a grim nod, Jinwoo summoned his shadow soldiers to cover his escape. They formed a protective barrier, holding back the serpent and the monarch's attacks as Jinwoo made his way toward the cavern's exit. The monarch's laughter followed him. Run, little hunter. But know this, there is no place you can hide that I cannot find you. As Jinwoo emerged from the cavern, the weight of the situation settled heavily on his shoulders. He had faced betrayal, a new threat, and the realization that he couldn't do this alone. His mind raced with possibilities. Who could he trust? Who would be strong enough to stand against the Phantom Monarch and the Abyssal Serpent? He thought of his fellow hunters, but the memory of their past conflicts made him wary. Still, he had no other choice. He needed allies, and fast. Jinwoo's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. He turned, ready to fight, but relaxed slightly when he saw Cha Heian and Wu Jin Chul emerging from the shadows. Their expressions were grim, and Jinwoo could tell they had sensed the disturbance. Jinwoo, Cha Heian said, her voice steady but laced with concern. What happened in there? We felt the energy from miles away. Jinwoo took a deep breath, his mind still reeling from the battle. The Phantom Monarch betrayed me. He's more powerful than I anticipated, and he's unleashed a creature called the Abyssal Serpent. We need to act quickly, or he'll destroy everything. Wu Jin Chul's eyes narrowed. We'll need a plan. We can't just charge in blindly. Jinwoo nodded, his mind already working through the possibilities. He knew they were at a disadvantage, but with teamwork and strategy, they might stand a chance. The stakes were higher than ever, and failure wasn't an option. As the three hunters began to strategize, the tension in the air was palpable. The Phantom Monarch's betrayal had shaken Jinwoo to his core, but it had also ignited a fire within him. He would not let the Monarch win. No matter the cost, he would protect his world and those he cared about. The battle was far from over, and Jinwoo was ready to fight with everything he had. Jinwoo's betrayal by the Phantom Monarch had left the group reeling, their trust shattered and their plans in disarray. The once cohesive team now moved with cautious tension, each member eyeing the others with suspicion. The air was thick with unspoken questions. Who else might be hiding secrets? Who could they truly rely on? It was in this fragile state that a new figure emerged, stepping into the chaos with an air of calculated confidence. Her name was Lyra, a rogue hunter with a reputation for unpredictability and a past shrouded in mystery. Her arrival was anything but subtle. She appeared in the midst of a heated argument between Jinwoo and his former allies, her presence immediately shifting the balance of power. Lyra's entrance was marked by a burst of energy, her crimson cloak billowing as she landed gracefully on the cracked stone floor of the dungeon. Her piercing silver eyes scanned the group, lingering on Jinwoo with a mix of curiosity and disdain. So, this is the infamous Shadow Monarch's vessel, she said, her voice a low, melodic hum that carried an edge of mockery. I expected more. The comment ignited a spark of anger in Jinwoo, but before he could respond, Lyra turned her attention to the others. And you, she continued, addressing the group, you're all so busy fighting among yourselves that you've forgotten the real enemy. How quaint. Her words struck a nerve, but it was her actions that truly shifted the dynamics. Without warning, Lyra lunged at Jinwoo, her movements a blur of speed and precision. Her weapon of choice was a pair of twin daggers, their blades glowing with a faint, otherworldly light. Jinwoo barely had time to summon his shadows, the dark tendrils rising to meet her assault. The clash was explosive, sparks flying as blade met shadow in a flurry of strikes and counters. Lyra's attacks were relentless, each one aimed with deadly accuracy, forcing Jinwoo to rely on his instincts and reflexes. He countered with a sweeping shadow strike, but Lyra anticipated the move, flipping backward with effortless grace. Is that all you've got? She taunted, her lips curling into a sly smile. The fight drew the attention of the others, who watched in stunned silence. It was clear that Lyra was no ordinary hunter, her skills rivaled Jinwoo's, and her motives were anything but clear. As the battle raged on, it became apparent that she was testing him, probing his limits with each strike. Jinwoo, for his part, was determined not to be outdone. He summoned his shadow soldiers, the dark figures materializing around him in a protective circle. Lyra's eyes gleamed with interest as she assessed the new threat. Impressive, she admitted, but let's see how they handle this. With a flick of her wrist, she unleashed a wave of energy, the force of it sending the shadow soldiers sprawling. Jinwoo gritted his teeth, his frustration mounting. He needed a new strategy, and fast. It was then that the rest of the group intervened, their loyalty to Jinwoo outweighing their doubts, for now. Cha Haein stepped forward, her sword gleaming as she positioned herself between Jinwoo and Lyra. Enough, she said, her voice firm. We don't have time for this. Lyra tilted her head, her expression unreadable. And who are you to stop me? She asked, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Cha didn't respond with words, instead, she launched her own attack, her sword slicing through the air with deadly precision. Lyra met the strike head-on, her daggers clashing against Cha's blade in a shower of sparks. The two women moved with a fluidity that was almost hypnotic, their movements a dance of skill and power. The fight escalated, drawing in the rest of the group. Thomas Andre, ever the wild card, joined the fray with a roar, his massive fists swinging with brute force. Lyra dodged his attacks with ease, her agility allowing her to stay one step ahead. Is this really the best you've got? She called out, her voice tinged with amusement. Her taunts only fueled their determination, but it was clear that she was toying with them, her true strength still hidden. The battle reached a fever pitch, the air crackling with energy as attacks and counters flew in rapid succession. Jinwoo, sensing an opportunity, unleashed a powerful shadow blast, the dark energy surging toward Lyra. She met it head-on, her daggers crossing as she channeled her own energy to counter the attack. The resulting explosion sent shockwaves through the dungeon, the force of it knocking everyone off their feet. When the dust settled, Lyra stood unscathed, her expression one of mild interest. Not bad, she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. But you'll need more than that if you want to survive what's coming. Her words hung in the air, a cryptic warning that left the group uneasy. Before anyone could respond, she turned and walked away, her crimson cloak trailing behind her. We'll meet again, she called over her shoulder, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. And next time, don't disappoint me. Her departure left the group in stunned silence, the weight of her words sinking in. Jinwoo clenched his fists, his mind racing. Who was Lyra, and what did she want? More importantly, how did she fit into the larger conflict with the Phantom Monarch? The questions swirled in his mind, but there was no time to dwell on them. The group's cohesion had been tested, and cracks were beginning to show. Trust was in short supply, and Lyra's arrival had only deepened the divide. As they regrouped, the tension was palpable, each member grappling with their own doubts and fears. The fight with Lyra had been a wake-up call, a reminder of the challenges that lay ahead. She was a wild card, her motives unclear and her allegiance uncertain. But one thing was certain, her presence had shifted the dynamics, introducing a new layer of complexity to the conflict. The group would need to find a way to work together, to overcome their differences and face the threats ahead. But with Lyra in the mix, that task had just become infinitely more difficult. The road ahead was fraught with danger, and the stakes had never been higher. As they prepared to move forward, one question loomed large: could they trust each other enough to survive what was coming? Only time would tell. Jinwoo's heart pounded as he stood amidst the ruins of the battlefield, the Phantom Monarch's shadow looming over him like a storm cloud. The air was thick with the stench of blood and ash, and the ground beneath his feet trembled with the residual energy of their clash. He had trusted the Phantom Monarch, had believed in their alliance against the greater threats that loomed over the world. But now, as the Monarch's cold laughter echoed through the desolate landscape, Jinwoo realized the truth: he had been betrayed. You were a useful pawn, Jinwoo, the Phantom Monarch sneered, his voice dripping with mockery. But even the strongest pawn is still just a piece on the board. The Monarch's form shimmered, his ethereal body shifting into something darker, more menacing. Jinwoo's eyes widened as he felt the oppressive weight of the Monarch's true power. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a revelation. The Phantom Monarch had been hiding his strength all along, biding his time until Jinwoo had weakened himself enough to be vulnerable. Jinwoo clenched his fists, his mind racing. He had always been one step ahead, his strategic mind and overwhelming power carrying him through even the most dire situations. But now, for the first time, he felt the icy grip of doubt. The Monarch's aura was suffocating, a force that seemed to warp reality itself. Jinwoo's instinct screamed at him to retreat, to regroup, but he knew there was no time. The Monarch's laughter grew louder, a cacophony of malice that seemed to pierce Jinwoo's very soul. "You thought you could challenge me?" The monarch taunted, his voice echoing like thunder. "You thought you could stand against the true ruler of the shadows?" With a wave of his hand, the monarch summoned a legion of shadowy figures, their forms twisting and writhing like living nightmares. Jinwoo recognized them instantly. They were the shadows of the fallen, the very soldiers he had once commanded. The monarch had stolen them, corrupted them, and turned them against their former master. Jinwoo's heart ached as he saw the faces of his comrades, their eyes hollow and filled with hatred. He had fought alongside them, had trusted them with his life. And now, they were nothing more than puppets in the monarch's twisted game. The weight of his failure threatened to crush him, but Jinwoo forced himself to focus. He couldn't afford to falter now. The stakes were too high. The battle began with a deafening roar as the shadow soldiers surged forward, their weapons gleaming with dark energy. Jinwoo moved with lightning speed, his daggers flashing as he cut through the first wave of attackers. But for every shadow he destroyed, two more seemed to take its place. The monarch watched from a distance, his expression one of cruel amusement. He was toying with Jinwoo, drawing out the fight to savor every moment of his former ally's despair. Jinwoo's mind raced as he fought, his body moving on autopilot as he tried to formulate a plan. He couldn't win this fight through brute force alone, not against an opponent who had been hiding his true power all along. He needed to outthink the monarch, to find a weakness he could exploit. But the monarch's power was overwhelming, his control over the shadows absolute. Every move Jinwoo made seemed to be anticipated, every attack countered before it could land. Desperation began to creep into Jinwoo's movements as the battle dragged on. His stamina was waning, his body battered and bruised from the relentless assault. He knew he couldn't keep this up much longer. But just as hope seemed to fade, a memory flashed in his mind, a conversation he had once had with his father, long before he had become the Shadow Monarch. His father had told him that true strength wasn't just about power, but about understanding the enemy, about finding the cracks in their armor and exploiting them. Jinwoo's eyes narrowed as he focused on the monarch, his mind working furiously. The monarch's power was immense, but it wasn't infinite. He was drawing on the shadows, using them to fuel his attacks. If Jinwoo could disrupt that connection, even for a moment, he might be able to turn the tide. It was a risky plan, one that would require perfect timing and precision. But it was the only chance he had. With a deep breath, Jinwoo summoned every ounce of his remaining strength and charged forward, his daggers blazing with light. The monarch's eyes widened in surprise as Jinwoo closed the distance between them, his movements too fast to predict. But just as Jinwoo was about to strike, the monarch raised his hand, and a wall of shadows erupted between them. Jinwoo's dagger struck the barrier with a deafening clang, the force of the impact sending him staggering backward. But Jinwoo wasn't deterred. He had expected this. With a roar, he unleashed a powerful blast of energy, shattering the shadowy barrier and sending shards of darkness flying in all directions. The monarch stumbled, his control over the shadows momentarily disrupted. It was the opening Jinwoo needed. With a speed that defied comprehension, Jinwoo closed the gap between them and plunged his dagger into the monarch's chest. The monarch's eyes widened in shock as he felt the blade pierce his flesh, his body convulsing as the light from Jinwoo's weapon spread through him. But even as the monarch fell to his knees, his lips curled into a sinister smile. "You think this is over?" The monarch rasped, his voice weak but filled with malice. "You've only delayed the inevitable. The shadows will consume you, Jinwoo. They always do." Jinwoo's heart sank as he realized the truth. The monarch's power wasn't just his own, it was tied to the shadows themselves. As long as the shadows existed, the monarch would never truly be defeated. And now, with the monarch's death, the shadows would grow even stronger, their darkness spreading unchecked. Jinwoo fell to his knees, his body trembling with exhaustion and despair. He had won the battle, but at what cost? The world was still in danger, and the shadows were more powerful than ever. He had sacrificed so much, had fought so hard, only to find himself back at square one. But even as the weight of his failure threatened to crush him, Jinwoo felt a spark of determination ignite within him. He couldn't give up. Not now. Not ever. The fight wasn't over, and as long as he drew breath, he would keep fighting. For his friends, for his family, for the world he had sworn to protect. With a deep breath, Jinwoo rose to his feet, his eyes burning with resolve. The shadows might be powerful, but so was he. And he would find a way to defeat them, no matter the cost. The battle had shifted, the stakes higher than ever. But Jinwoo was ready. He would face the darkness head on, and he would emerge victorious. The end of Part 4. Jinwoo stood amidst the ruins of what was once a bustling city, the weight of betrayal heavy on his shoulders. The Phantom Monarch, a figure he had once trusted, had revealed their true colors, leaving Jinwoo and his allies in disarray. The stakes had never been higher. The Monarch's forces were advancing, their numbers seemingly endless, and time was running out. Jinwoo knew they couldn't afford to falter now. The only way forward was to grow stronger, forge new alliances, and uncover the Monarch's weakness before it was too late. The first step was training. Jinwoo gathered his closest allies, Cha Hae-in, Beru, and Igris, in a secluded area far from the Monarch's reach. The air was thick with tension as they prepared for what lay ahead. Jinwoo's shadow soldiers formed a perimeter, their eerie presence a constant reminder of the power at his disposal. But even with his army, Jinwoo knew they needed more. They needed to push their limits, to experiment with new tactics that could turn the tide of battle. "We don't have time for hesitation," Jinwoo said, his voice firm. "The Monarch's forces are relentless, and they'll stop at nothing to destroy us. We need to be faster, stronger, and smarter. Let's start with sparring. No holding back." Cha Hae-in stepped forward, her sword gleaming in the dim light. She had always been one of the strongest hunters, but now she needed to surpass even her own expectations. Jinwoo summoned Igris, his loyal knight, to face her. The clash of steel against steel echoed through the training grounds as the two warriors tested each other's limits. Jinwoo watched closely, analyzing their movements, searching for ways to improve their coordination. Meanwhile, Beru, the Ant King, was tasked with honing his speed and precision. Jinwoo created a series of obstacles using his shadows, forcing Beru to navigate through a maze of traps and hazards. The Ant King's movements were a blur, his instincts sharpened by the constant threat of danger. Jinwoo nodded in approval, knowing that Beru's agility would be crucial in the battles to come. As the days passed, the group's training intensified. Jinwoo introduced environmental hazards into their sparring sessions, simulating the chaos of a real battlefield. Explosions rocked the ground, debris rained from above, and the air was thick with smoke. The goal was to adapt, to think on their feet and use the environment to their advantage. Cha Hae-in learned to use the debris as cover, launching surprise attacks from unexpected angles. Igris mastered the art of deflecting projectiles, his shield becoming an impenetrable wall. And Beru, ever the opportunist, used the chaos to strike with deadly precision. But training alone wasn't enough. Jinwoo knew they needed allies. He reached out to the remaining hunter guilds, many of whom had suffered heavy losses at the hands of the Monarch's forces. The response was mixed, some were eager to join forces, while others were too broken to fight. Jinwoo didn't blame them. The Monarch's power was terrifying, and not everyone had the strength to face it head-on. Still, a few brave souls stepped forward, their determination reignited by Jinwoo's resolve. Among them was Thomas Andre, the guild master of the Scavenger Guild. Despite their rocky history, Thomas recognized the gravity of the situation. "If we don't stop the Monarch now, there won't be a world left to fight for," he said, his voice gruff but resolute. Jinwoo accepted his help, knowing that Thomas's raw strength would be a valuable asset. With their forces bolstered, Jinwoo turned his attention to uncovering the Monarch's weakness. He spent hours poring over ancient texts and consulting with scholars who had studied the Monarch's rise to power. The answers were elusive, but one clue stood out, a mention of a Heart of Shadows, a source of the Monarch's immense power. If they could destroy it, they might stand a chance. The final battle loomed on the horizon, and the tension was palpable. Jinwoo and his allies stood at the edge of the Monarch's stronghold, a fortress of darkness that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. The Monarch's forces were already mobilizing, their ranks swelling with monstrous creatures that defied description. Jinwoo took a deep breath, his shadow soldiers forming a protective barrier around him. "This is it," he said, his voice steady. "We hit them hard and fast. Stick to the plan, and don't let them overwhelm us." The battle began with a deafening roar as the two forces collided. Jinwoo unleashed his full power, his shadows surging forward like a tidal wave. Cha Hae-in and Thomas fought side by side, their combined strength carving a path through the enemy ranks. Igris and Beru moved with deadly precision, their movements synchronized as they took down one foe after another. But the Monarch's forces were relentless. Waves of enemies poured forth, their numbers seemingly endless. Jinwoo's experimental tactics were put to the test as he used the environment to his advantage. He summoned pillars of shadow to block enemy advances, created traps that ensnared entire groups, and even used the terrain to funnel the enemy into kill zones. The battlefield was a chaotic mess of explosions, screams, and the clash of steel, but Jinwoo's mind remained focused. As the battle raged on, Jinwoo caught a glimpse of the Monarch's Heart of Shadows, a pulsating orb of darkness that hovered above the fortress. It was the source of their power, and it had to be destroyed. But reaching it would be no easy task. The Monarch's strongest lieutenants stood guard, their eyes glowing with malice. Jinwoo signaled to his allies, and they launched a coordinated assault. Cha Hae-in and Thomas charged forward, their attacks drawing the lieutenants' attention. Igris and Beru flanked the enemy, their movements too fast to track. Jinwoo used the distraction to slip past, his shadows carrying him toward the heart of shadows. The final confrontation was brutal. The Monarch's lieutenants fought with a ferocity that pushed Jinwoo and his allies to their limits. But they had trained for this. They had grown stronger, and they fought with everything they had. In the end, it was Jinwoo who delivered the final blow, his blade piercing the heart of shadows and shattering it into 1,000 pieces. The fortress began to collapse, its dark energy dissipating into the air. Jinwoo and his allies barely made it out alive, their bodies battered and bruised but their spirits unbroken. The Monarch's forces were in disarray, their leader's power gone. But Jinwoo knew this was only the beginning. The war was far from over, and the stakes would only get higher. As they regrouped, Jinwoo looked at his allies with a newfound respect. They had faced overwhelming odds and emerged victorious. But the fight wasn't over yet. The Phantom Monarch's betrayal had set them on a path of no return, and they would need to grow even stronger if they were to survive what lay ahead. The clock was ticking, and the next battle would be even more brutal. But for now, they had won. And that was enough. The air crackled with tension as Jinwoo stood face to face with the Phantom Monarch, the once ally who had betrayed him in the most devastating way. The battlefield was a chaotic tapestry of swirling shadows, shattered terrain, and the lingering echoes of their previous clashes. Jinwoo's fists clenched, his knuckles white as he stared down his former comrade, his eyes burning with a mix of fury and determination. The Phantom Monarch, towering and ethereal, exuded an aura of overwhelming power, his spectral form flickering like a dying flame. But Jinwoo wasn't about to back down. This was the moment he had been preparing for, the moment he would push past his limits and reclaim what had been stolen from him. The Phantom Monarch struck first, his movements a blur as he lunged forward with a spectral blade that seemed to cut through the very fabric of reality. Jinwoo reacted instantly, his instincts honed from countless battles kicking in as he sidestepped the attack, the blade grazing his shoulder and leaving a trail of icy cold in its wake. Jinwoo countered with a swift uppercut, his fist enveloped in dark energy that surged like a tempest. The Phantom Monarch staggered back, but only for a moment, his form reforming almost instantly as if the blow had never landed. "Is that all you've got, Jinwoo?" The Monarch taunted, his voice echoing with a hollow, mocking tone. "You'll need more than that to defeat me." Jinwoo gritted his teeth, his mind racing as he analyzed the situation. The Phantom Monarch's ability to regenerate was a problem, but Jinwoo knew he couldn't afford to waste time. He needed to adapt, to find a way to break through the Monarch's defenses. With a burst of speed, Jinwoo closed the distance between them, his movements a blur as he unleashed a flurry of strikes aimed at overwhelming his opponent. Each punch and kick was infused with his shadow energy, the force of his attacks creating shockwaves that rippled through the battlefield. The Phantom Monarch blocked and parried with ease, his spectral blade dancing through the air as he deflected Jinwoo's assault. But Jinwoo wasn't aiming to land a decisive blow, he was testing his opponent, probing for weaknesses. As the battle raged on, Jinwoo began to notice a pattern in the Phantom Monarch's movements. Every time he regenerated, there was a slight delay, a fraction of a second where his form flickered before solidifying again. It was a small window, but it was enough. Jinwoo's eyes narrowed as he formulated a new strategy. He needed to exploit that weakness, to strike at the precise moment when the Monarch was most vulnerable. With a surge of determination, Jinwoo channeled his shadow energy into his fists, the dark aura around him intensifying as he prepared for his next move. The Phantom Monarch lunged again, his blade slicing through the air with deadly precision. Jinwoo dodged to the side, his movements fluid and precise as he avoided the attack. But this time, instead of countering immediately, he waited, his body coiled like a spring as he focused on the Monarch's movements. The Phantom Monarch swung again, and Jinwoo ducked under the blade, his eyes locked on his opponent's form. As the Monarch's blade passed harmlessly overhead, Jinwoo saw his opening. The Monarch's form flickered, the telltale sign of his regeneration beginning. In that split second, Jinwoo struck. His fist slammed into the Phantom Monarch's chest with the force of a cannonball, the impact sending shockwaves rippling through the air. The Monarch's eyes widened in shock as his form began to destabilize, the dark energy from Jinwoo's attack disrupting his regeneration. Jinwoo didn't let up, his fists a blur as he unleashed a relentless barrage of strikes, each one landing with pinpoint accuracy. The Phantom Monarch staggered back, his form flickering wildly as he struggled to maintain his cohesion. You've grown stronger, the Monarch gasped, his voice tinged with disbelief. But it won't be enough. With a roar, the Phantom Monarch unleashed a wave of spectral energy, the force of the blast sending Jinwoo skidding backward. Jinwoo dug his heels into the ground, his body trembling as he fought to maintain his footing. The energy washed over him, threatening to overwhelm him, but Jinwoo refused to yield. With a fierce cry, he pushed through the pain, his shadow energy flaring to life as he countered the blast with a wave of his own. The two energies collided in a spectacular explosion, the shockwave tearing through the battlefield and sending debris flying in all directions. As the dust settled, Jinwoo and the Phantom Monarch stood facing each other once more, their bodies battered but unbroken. The Monarch's form was flickering more erratically now, his regeneration struggling to keep up with the damage Jinwoo had inflicted. But Jinwoo knew the fight wasn't over yet. The Phantom Monarch was still a formidable opponent, and he wouldn't go down without a fight. "You've pushed me further than I expected, Jinwoo," the Monarch said, his voice low and menacing. "But this ends now." The Phantom Monarch raised his hand, and the air around him began to distort as he summoned a massive wave of spectral energy. The ground beneath him cracked and splintered as the energy grew, the sheer force of it threatening to obliterate everything in its path. Jinwoo's eyes widened as he realized the magnitude of the attack. He needed to act fast. Summoning every ounce of his strength, Jinwoo focused his shadow energy into his hands, the dark aura around him intensifying until it was almost blinding. He could feel the power surging through him, threatening to overwhelm him, but he held on, channeling it into a single, devastating attack. As the Phantom Monarch unleashed his wave of energy, Jinwoo met it head-on, his own attack colliding with the Monarch's in a cataclysmic explosion of light and shadow. The force of the clash sent shockwaves rippling through the battlefield, the ground trembling as if it might split apart at any moment. Jinwoo gritted his teeth, his body straining as he fought to hold his ground. The energy from the Monarch's attack was immense, but Jinwoo refused to back down. With a roar, he pushed forward, his attack cutting through the Monarch's energy like a blade through water. The Phantom Monarch's eyes widened in shock as Jinwoo's attack reached him, the dark energy engulfing his form and tearing through his defenses. The Monarch let out a guttural scream as his form began to disintegrate, the dark energy consuming him from within. Jinwoo didn't let up, pouring every last ounce of his strength into the attack until the Phantom Monarch's form was completely obliterated, leaving nothing but a fading wisp of spectral energy in its place. Jinwoo stood there for a moment, his chest heaving as he struggled to catch his breath. The battlefield was silent now, the only sound the faint crackling of residual energy in the air. He had done it. He had defeated the Phantom Monarch. But as he looked around at the devastation surrounding him, Jinwoo knew that the fight had taken its toll. His body ached, his energy reserves were nearly depleted, and the scars of battle would linger long after the dust had settled. Still, he couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. He had pushed past his limits, adapted to the challenges before him, and emerged victorious. As Jinwoo turned to leave the battlefield, a faint whisper reached his ears, carried on the wind like a ghostly echo. "This isn't over, Jinwoo." The word sent a chill down his spine, but he shook it off, his resolve hardening once more. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them head-on, just as he always had. For now, though, he allowed himself a moment of rest, his eyes closing as he took in the quiet aftermath of the battle. The fight was over, but the war was far from finished. And Jinwoo would be ready. The battlefield was a chaotic symphony of destruction, the air thick with the acrid stench of burning mana and the metallic tang of blood. Jinwoo Sung, the Shadow Monarch, stood at the epicenter of the storm, his once impenetrable aura flickering like a dying flame. The Phantom Monarch, once his ally, now loomed before him, a towering figure of malice and betrayal. The betrayal had cut deeper than any blade, and Jinwoo's heart burned with a mixture of rage and sorrow. The Phantom Monarch's laughter echoed across the desolate landscape, a cruel reminder of the trust that had been shattered. "Did you truly believe you could stand against me, Jinwoo? You are but a pawn in a game you cannot comprehend." The Phantom Monarch sneered, his voice dripping with venom. Jinwoo's fists clenched, his shadow soldiers trembling as they felt their master's anguish. But he refused to falter. This was not just a battle for survival, it was a battle for the fate of the universe itself. The Phantom Monarch lunged, his movements a blur of dark energy that tore through the air like a scythe. Jinwoo barely managed to raise his dagger, the clash of their weapons sending shockwaves that rippled across the battlefield. The force of the impact sent Jinwoo skidding backward, his boots carving deep grooves into the ground. His arms screamed in protest, every muscle pushed to its limit. The Phantom Monarch pressed his advantage, his attacks relentless and precise. Each strike was a calculated effort to break Jinwoo's spirit as much as his body. But Jinwoo's resolve was unyielding. He had faced death before, had stared into the abyss and emerged stronger. This was no different. With a roar, he summoned his shadow soldiers, their forms materializing from the darkness to swarm the Phantom Monarch. The tide of battle shifted momentarily, but the Phantom Monarch's power was overwhelming. He tore through the shadows with ease, his laughter growing louder with every fallen soldier. Jinwoo's breath came in ragged gasps, his vision blurring as exhaustion threatened to overtake him. He could feel the weight of his injuries, the toll of the battle threatening to crush him. But then, a memory surfaced, a fleeting image of his sister, Jinwoo, and the promise he had made to protect her. His heart surged with renewed determination. This was not just his fight. It was for everyone he cared about, for the future he had fought so hard to secure. With a burst of energy, Jinwoo channeled every ounce of his remaining strength into his next attack. His dagger gleamed with a blinding light as he launched himself at the Phantom Monarch, their clash shaking the very foundations of the universe. The impact was cataclysmic, a shockwave of energy that obliterated everything in its path. When the dust settled, both combatants stood battered and bloodied, their auras flickering like dying stars. The Phantom Monarch's expression twisted into one of disbelief. "Impossible. How can you still stand?" he snarled, his voice laced with desperation. Jinwoo's response was a single word, spoken with quiet intensity. "Hope." In that moment, something within him shifted. The shadows around him began to writhe and coalesce, forming a massive, spectral figure that dwarfed even the Phantom Monarch. It was the true manifestation of the Shadow Monarch's power, a force of nature that had lain dormant within Jinwoo until now. The Phantom Monarch's eyes widened in terror as the figure descended upon him, its ethereal claws tearing through his defenses with ease. The battle was no longer a contest of strength, it was a reckoning. Jinwoo's shadow soldiers surged forward, their attacks synchronized with their master's will. The Phantom Monarch fought valiantly, but his power was no match for the unity and resolve of Jinwoo and his army. The final blow came not as a strike, but as a release. Jinwoo's spectral form enveloped the Phantom Monarch, its energy consuming him from within. The Phantom Monarch let out a final, anguished cry as his body disintegrated into nothingness, his essence scattered to the winds. The battlefield fell silent, the echoes of the battle fading into the void. Jinwoo collapsed to his knees, his body trembling with exhaustion. The victory was bittersweet, the cost of the battle etched into every fiber of his being. But as he looked out over the desolate landscape, he felt a glimmer of hope. The universe had been reshaped by their actions, the balance of power forever altered. The Phantom Monarch's betrayal had been a catalyst, forcing Jinwoo to confront the depths of his own power and the responsibilities that came with it. The aftermath of the battle was a time of reflection and rebuilding. Jinwoo's shadow soldiers, now more powerful than ever, stood as guardians of the new order. The alliances forged in the heat of battle had created bonds that transcended the conflicts of the past. Jinwoo himself had changed, his experiences shaping him into a leader who understood the weight of his decisions. The universe, though scarred, was poised for a new era of peace and prosperity. But Jinwoo knew that the fight was far from over. The shadows still held secrets, and the balance of power was a fragile thing. As he stood at the edge of the battlefield, gazing out at the stars, he made a silent vow. He would protect this new world, no matter the cost. For in the end, it was not just his strength that had carried him through, it was the hope he had fought for, the belief that even in the darkest of times, a brighter future was possible. And with that hope, he stepped forward into the unknown, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead.